Hello and welcome back to Dentistry Talks. In today's episode, we are thrilled to welcome Silva Neves, a leading sex and relationship therapist, to explore the often overlooked pressures that dentistry places on personal relationships. Silva shares his expertise on how the stresses and demands of dental careers can impact intimacy and connection with your partners. Drawing on his extensive background, Silva reveals how it can benefit all kinds of relationships, not just those in crisis. We'll discuss common myths about sex and relationships and why communication is key, with Silva offering practical tips for reconnecting with your partner, especially when career demands in dentistry can take centre stage. Hello. Thank
Hi.
you so much for joining us today. How are you this morning?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. We were just talking about how cold it is, but I am relieved to say it is quite warm in here. And this is why I've got this jumper on today, because recorded some recently and I had a t-shirt on and I was very cold throughout the conversation. So I've come in prepared today.
Good.
I'm really excited for this conversation. I think a lot of people watching and listening will be very intrigued to hear what we are going to cover today. And I just think it's a super interesting topic anyway. So I'm going to throw you straight in the deep end with a question.
Let's go.
So dentistry is a notoriously high stress career. The environment, there's a lot of pressure to perform and basically make sure the treatment is done correctly. How common is it for work to impact your personal relationships?
It's very common in most professions. It's very, very common because work is hard, right, for a lot of people. And so when there's a lot of stress, people come home, and when they come home, they feel tired, exhausted, or sometimes they even think about work, think about emails, think about things they haven't done or could do better. And so then people really stay in that kind of like preoccupation mode, and it's very easy to just not pay attention to the rest of life. So yeah, it's very, very common.
I know it sounds like a bit of a basic and obvious answer, like a question that everyone said, well, of course it does. But I think a lot of people can feel quite alone in their experiences, and I think it's just good to start with that, to make sure that those who are perhaps listening, it is completely normal, and I hope we can break down a lot of the myths that surround relationships today, and obviously I'm going to pick your brains for some like tips and advice that people can kind of take away and implement into their own relationship. So I'd love to know a bit about you. So obviously sex and relationship therapist, niche job. how was that a career path that you felt was right for you?
Well, I've always been interested in sex and relationship for some reason, because I grew up gay, and so I was always kind of aware that of sexuality in some ways, even before I knew about the word sexuality, But so for me, it was always something that was there. And then when I started to train as a psychotherapist, I did my core training in psychotherapy, and by the end of it, when I qualified, I was really disappointed that there was hardly any teaching on sex, sexuality, sexual problems, and hardly any on couples therapy or relationship therapy. So then I did a postgrad training specializing in that area, and that became my home.
And you enjoy it?
I love it.
I'd hope you do, if that's the career you've pursued. But I think it must be super rewarding, I think, to maybe talk to people and see where they started and sort of where they end up at the end of the sessions that they have with you. It must be really satisfying to sort of be on that journey with them.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love it. Every day I work, but it doesn't feel like work, because it's about being with people, helping people, and helping people in a really fundamental way, because sex and relationships is kind of a core part of people, and it's the intimate part of people. And when people trust me to just share the intimate world and for me to help them, it's a great privilege. Really, really great.
I can imagine.
And going back to the kind of like the training, it's like in psychotherapy training, we often think of depression and anxiety and those kind of
That's true.
mental health conditions. And often we say, we are trained to say, well, depression affects sex life and sexual problems. But what I see often is the other way around. And we don't talk about that often. We don't talk about the fact that sometimes being in a relationship that is really struggling or having an ongoing sexual problem that doesn't get resolved can actually create anxiety and depression.
Yeah, I can see that. I think what would be good now is to break down some myths. So what are some of the most common myths surrounding sex and relationship? I'm sorry, you must have loads of these.
Yeah, well, we can spend the whole day on just myths, okay?
Maybe pick a few out. So let's break some down. What are some of the most common myths surrounding sex and relationships?
In relationship myth, the most common one is the one.
Okay.
You're going to meet the one, and then it's going to be your other half. This is really putting a lot of pressure on just the one person. And then when people do feel that they meet the one person that they want to be with forever, they tend to want to put all of their needs into that one person. So that one person then becomes somebody who has to be the greatest lover, a great parent if you're going to have children, good income, good in the housework, and on and on and on and on and on. And be the best entertainer and so on. And I think this is creating a lot of pressure because often people are then, especially in cities, they become isolated and then they just look at just one other person for having a good life. And when people go into the one relationship, then they tend to neglect friendships and they tend to neglect other social networks, which are just as important. And I think a lot of the time, when people say, oh, well, I'm really unhappy because my partner doesn't like the same kind of movies I like. Yeah. Well, then you think, okay, fine, don't, and just have a friend instead. Right? Yeah. So the one is a big thing. And also with the one kind of narrative, people just don't feel they can leave a relationship if it's not working. So they say, we've got to keep working at it, and that can also be a problem. And with that, another narrative that's really close to that is that people feel like they're investing in a relationship, almost like a business. So say if people are in a relationship for 5 years and then it's just really not working out, rather than saying, oh, well, maybe I've learned a lot from those 5 years and it's time to move on and take my learning to another relationship. They might say, I've invested 5 years and it will be a failure if we end a relationship. Yeah. And sometimes people stay in struggling relationships for a long time when they're just not supposed to be in that relationship.
When you say that, it is a weird word to use in that context. Invested, you hear this a lot. I've invested my time and romantic and sexual energy into one person. I don't want this to go anywhere else. We've got this far, let's just push through.
Yes.
But I guess having the one narrative, it makes it really hard to, I guess, walk away from something that potentially might not be working anymore and might not be what's best for you and your partner.
That's right, exactly. And another myth is monogamy. That's a myth too. As in, monogamy is the best thing and the priority, and everything else is alternatives. Yeah. And that's just really not reality. So when people tend to, if people go into open relationships, for example, the question that they ask is, how did you choose to be in an open relationship? Or why? But nobody really asks, how did you choose to be in a monogamous relationship, or why are you in a monogamous relationship? And when I ask that question to my couples who are in monogamous relationship, they get a bit shocked, thinking, oh, I don't know,
nobody's never asked me that before.
How did I do that? And that's when people start to realize that because of societal messages and all those myths about relationships, that people just sleepwalk into relationships without really self-reflecting or asking themselves any questions.
Very, very good point. I think in a lot of ways, the society has come a long way. If you even, rewind 5, 10, 15 years and look at where we are now, there's a lot more narrative surrounding sexuality and relationships and how they can be different, and you can sort of tailor them to your own needs and other people's needs, and that's fantastic. But I think when it comes to monogamy, for me anyway, personally, when I talk to people, I think it's still something that is some people find really difficult to get their head around. The fact that some people might not want to be or in a monogamous relationship, and people find it really tricky to understand that, I think.
Absolutely. Yes. And then once again, it just makes people just ignoring other relationships, or it puts the intimate partnership at the top as a priority and neglecting friendship, neglecting other social networks. So often people, then if you think of people in a city, far away from family, far away from everybody, not connecting with friendship, and they have one child or two children, in a flat, it can feel just so much pressure.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often people just really struggle with that. So it's good to change some of those myths. Really.
Yeah, absolutely.
Are you ready for sex myths?
Yes, bring them on. What's a sex myth?
So the big one is sex is penetration.
Good sex myth. I guess a great sex myth.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a bit on what you mean by that?
Yes, like a lot of people think that proper sex has to involve penetration. So, in heterosexual couples, it would be penis in vagina penetration, and in gay male couples, it will be penis in anus penetration. But they think that this has to happen to qualify as sex, and everything else is not proper sex, or it's foreplay or whatever. And that is kind of ridiculous if you think about it, because penetration is just one sexual activity that a lot of people don't actually like that much. We know that women don't tend to have orgasms with penetration, and yet penetration is the thing that people focus on. And a lot of gay men just don't like anal sex, and it's not. And if they don't, then it feels like, there's something wrong with me, or I'm broken in some ways, rather than to say, it's just one sexual activity out of many other people can have. Heterosexual couples and gay couples, lesbian and so on. They can just have oral sex, and just oral sex is proper sex. You don't need to do anything else, or using sex toys, or mutual masturbation, or whatever. All of that is sex, as long as it's fun, pleasurable, and that people just get some satisfaction out of it. That's it.
I think that's a really good one. Again, it comes back to that. Again, when you talk about things like virginity as well, it's and that that is you haven't lost your virginity unless you have had penetrative sex. That's something that I grew up with. That was how it was defined, and I think hopefully the generation coming through now is a little bit more forward thinking on their approach to sex and how it's understood and what that is. But yeah, that was something that I grew up with, that is what that meant. And,
and you're making a good point, because when even that language is very sex negative in some ways.
Exactly.
And society, it's still very sex negative. Even, as you say, now there's more discussions about it, and people can make up their minds with more sex positivity, but it's still very sex negative. Losing virginity is still kind of something that is out there, and it's from a deficient point of view. It's almost like, be careful, because once you lose it, then it's kind of like you can't go back, right?
Yeah.
And why do we think of that, rather than to think when you have sex for the first time, it's stepping into your sexual debut? If you have that conversation, it's a lot more positive. It's about getting something, going towards, rather than losing something. And I think it's just really, it's good, all of us together, to try to change these kind of languages that are so embedded still in our society.
Absolutely. So as we mentioned earlier, dentistry is quite high pressure, and there's going to be a lot of people who perhaps met their partners at dental school. I know there's a lot of people who are in relationships or marriages where both people in the relationship are dentists or a dental professional. We all know a lot of people meet at work, so that's perhaps quite unsurprising. What would you say to couples who perhaps want to explore some couples therapy or sex and relationship therapy, but feel worried to kind of make that step into it? Because I think we spoke about this actually in a conversation before this. There's still quite a lot of stigma surrounding therapy and what that is, and I think a lot of people might think, well, my relationship, I don't view it as, again, I don't mean to use a negative word, but like failing or struggling. Is this for me? I mean, who would qualify for this therapy? Is there a specific type of relationship that you need to have in order to take that step?
Good question. Therapy is associated with problems, right? And problems that you can't resolve by yourself. So then you have to go to a therapist. And when it's about sex and relationship, it's very daunting, because it's like, oh my gosh, we're going to talk about, really intimate things or things that are wrong. And what if my therapist is going to think that I'm very broken inside? It's very difficult. But yes, most people go to sex and relationship therapists when they have problems, big problems that they can't resolve, whether it's frequent conflicts in a relationship or a sexual problem that they can't solve. But I think that a lot of the time people come to sex and relationship therapy a bit too late, and when resentment has built up, and when problems have become so big and shame has become so big that people just are not even wanting to talk about it or approach the subject. I think sex and relationship therapy should be also for people who don't have a problem, but want to come and have a few sessions, not long term, but a few sessions to just explore the erotic mind, explore their turn on, explore the relationship with their bodies, explore the relationship with their gender, and have learn how to have the erotic conversations with their partner, because that is not available at the moment. There is not good sex education, and there's not good relationship education. So people don't learn how to get in touch and explore their erotic mind. And so going to see a professional like a sex and relationship therapist at the beginning, you know, for example, when they meet a partner, and at the beginning of meeting someone, it might be a good time to go and see a sex and relationship therapist before there are problems setting in, because then they can start to be helped to have that conversation that we are not socialized to have.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the time as well, we forget that potentially both people entering into that relationship have a whole history behind them of things that they're carrying into the next. And it's not their fault, you know, that's just how their experiences, and it could be both positive and negative experiences, and then you've got to kind of muddle through those with somebody totally new. That's hard, I think. That's tricky.
Yes, and there are so many words that is in the subject of sex and relationship that are big words, that are really vague, and there are just multiple meanings for those words. So take monogamy again, for example. Monogamy is a word, but that has multiple meanings. So if one partner says, oh, yes, let's be monogamous, and the other person says, sure, let's agree, we're monogamous, and that's it. That's where the conversation ends, because they haven't learned how to have the conversation. Rather, instead to say, okay, what do you mean by monogamy? What is your version of monogamy? Because one person's monogamy could be, you know, exclusive, but flirting is okay outside. And other people, flirting would be a no-no, for example. For some, monogamy means not watching pornography, and others is pornography is fine. And when people don't have those conversations, then they just live their lives by their own version of monogamy, assuming it's the same with their partner. And then later on, there might be an issue like, I can't believe you flirted with that person in a bar. And then the other person thought, oh, is that wrong? I'm sorry, I didn't think it was wrong. And then resentment, anger, issues, and wounds can start to appear because the conversation didn't happen first.
See, it's when you... That seems such an obvious thing now you've said it, but that's not something that I've ever considered, how the importance of considering that these words will have different meanings for different people, and actually having a discussion surrounding that is really important. And I think if we just had this kind of education at a young age, it would be so much healthier, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's right. It's obvious when we talk about it, but if we don't talk about it, it's not obvious. You know, we don't know what we don't know. No, intimacy is another word. You know, a lot of time people, instead of saying we had sex, they say we were intimate. Okay, and so they swap that word for some reason because it's less. I don't know, shame, I guess, probably shame maybe. But intimacy sometimes can just be about sitting down with your partner on a couch, listening to each other and being curious about your partner's lives, and to continue to be curious about your partner's life. That can be a real big intimate moment that does not involve sex. So it's good also to deconstruct what intimacy means, what relationship means, what sex means, what monogamy means, and all of that. And, you know, the sex therapy space is a good one for it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a huge boom in private dentistry over the last few years, and also in younger dentists stepping into the business side, so opening up practices at a young age. So it's that kind of high pressure is with them from quite an early stage of their career. So they're kind of, you know, opening up a practice and they've got to get up and running, and they're very career driven. There's a lot of, I think a lot of the time, you know, if you're going to be a dentist, I think you kind of have to be to some extent. You're at dental school for 5 years, you know, that's a long time to be studying. So some people will have a mentality of career first, family second, not in a necessarily deliberately, but that's just sometimes how it happens because they have to prioritise their work in order to get things up and running and working properly. What's your opinion on that approach, sort of career first or family or intimate relationships, whatever you want to call it, second? Is that something that should be avoided, or is it something that can be worked with?
Well, there is career first and intimate relationship second, or career first and family second. Those are two different things, because family often is to do with when to have children.
Yes, okay. Let's go with the former, the intimate relationships. Okay. Yeah.
So intimate relationship, that's a problem because often people do that. They say, I've put everything into work, and if the partner is also in the same profession, they're going to put everything into work. Of course, it's important to put a lot of time in work when you're building a practice. Yeah. You know, sure. you have to make some sacrifices. But it's really important not to neglect your intimate relationship, because it's part of our quality of life. One of our colleagues, a famous colleague that you might have heard, Esther Perel, says that the quality of our lives depends on the quality of our relationships.
Okay.
So it's really important that we don't neglect that area of our lives, because it does actually go back into the work. You know, if we are happy in our relationships, we're going to be happy with ourselves, and we're going to have more energy to make the right decisions about our career. So that's just one thing. And also not to forget that life is short as well, okay?
That's true. That's true.
You know, we tend to not think about that, but some studies have been done in hospices about people at the end of life. Almost 100% says that the biggest regrets of their lives is that they did not spend enough time with their loved ones and not enough time connected with their loved ones.
Wow.
So that's really a big thing if you think about it. And now in our world that is so much work-driven and capitalist and earning money and more money and more money and accumulating more things, then we can just forget about relationships, and we can just have an entire life just working and working. And then by the end thinking, oh my gosh, I've lost touch with all the people that matter.
Yeah.
And at the end of the life, that's what really matters. So I think it's really important that we put relationships back into the picture of one of the priorities. You know, our intimate partner should not be last when everything else is done.
Yeah, absolutely.
And often this is what intimate relationships end up being. You know, in a long-term relationship, once you're established, you know, at the beginning when you're dating, it's a priority. You make an effort to date. But once you're established, it goes after even doing the dishes, you know?
yeah, that's true. I think that will relate. There'll be people tuning in, and that will be like, they're like, oh gosh, that's actually me. You know, I have not prioritized my partner. My partner may not be prioritizing them either. How can people get back on track? Because obviously that's quite a daunting prospect. You know, okay, we have been prioritizing other things over us, and we want to kind of bring it back to us and reconnect. How do people even start to have that conversation if it's one that hasn't naturally happened before? Because that's really tricky. We've already spoken about stigma and shame and things like that, and if you don't have that channel of communication already established in your relationship, it's really hard to start, particularly if there's years behind you already and you're 10 years into a relationship. So yeah, how can people start to have these conversations?
Well, it's having conversation, it is the doing as well. And the good news is that it's really quite easy.
Okay.
And things can change very quickly if you pay attention to it. So often in an intimate relationship, if you want to reprioritize it, and I'm not saying that work should come second, you know, I think work is important for people, it's part of people's self-esteem, it's good to enjoy work. But when work is busy, say on a busy week, and you don't pay attention to your relationship, this is when you have to think, what can I do to put back some energy into my relationship?
Yeah.
And the good news is it's just the very small things that really matter, not the big gesture, the very small things. So sometimes a text is enough.
That's true.
Right? An emoji is enough sometimes when life is busy.
Yeah.
Because that says to the partner, I matter, my partner thought of me and sent me that emoji that made me laugh or made me sexy or maybe whatever. Right? So that's it. Sometimes that's it. And coming home at the end of a long day and just having just even 1 minute to drop everything and really focus on your partner and say, how are you? But actually wanting to know the answer.
Yeah.
Not just the kind of like, how are you? I'm fine, kind of
doing something else at the same time. Yeah.
You know, the actual proper question with a proper thought behind it.
Yeah.
And to wanting to hear the answer, the genuine answer. And that is enough. I kid you not, this is enough to bring some energy back into the relationship. It's just like a relationship is alive, so it's like a plant. You have to water it on a daily basis, but you don't have to do a lot with it. You know, if the relationship originally is quite good, you know, like you know, if you still like each other, basically.
That's kind of necessary.
That's the base. But then after that, it's just those small little bits, and that's enough. And sometimes just, you know, remembering things like anniversaries, birthdays, of course, those things.
Yeah.
And noticing your partner, just noticing your partner on a daily basis. Again, it doesn't take long. Just about, oh, I notice you're deep in thought. You know, how are you doing? Oh, I notice you look sad. And, you know, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I mentioned the word family earlier, so I'm going to come back to that now, because I think we're having this conversation and then there's something over here that people maybe listen will be like, well, what about, and it will be the children, you know, families having children at whatever age, they might be really, really young, or they might be teenagers or even older. They're a huge responsibility, you know, they take up a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, and they are necessary to prioritize a lot of the time, particularly if they are not able to actually function without your help. So how do people make space for themselves and their partners or their intimate relationships within that realm? I'm assuming this is something that comes up maybe quite a lot in
all the time.
Yeah. Thought so.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the time, that's another myth, actually. Another myth is that when people have children, they say we have to prioritize our children.
Okay.
And this is unpopular, but it is not true.
Okay.
Okay, because what you need to prioritize is your relationship with your partner. And the reason for this is because the children live in your relationship. They live in that relational space that you co-create with your partner. So if you're going to start to neglect your partner to focus on your children, then the relationship becomes sad, depressed, flat, or sometimes even full of resentment. And the children will feel that. And so it's not good for children to be in a relationship where the two parents are just exhausted and knackered and hate each other, or start to argue with each other just because they're too exhausted. Right? Yeah. So it's really important that they keep teamwork. And they keep listening to each other, and they keep investing. Let's not do that word. keep putting some energy into their relationship to keep the relationship solid. So it's partner first, children second, because the children will do much better in a relationship that is very solid and full of warmth and love and teamwork and encouragement. So this is unpopular, but this is really what really works.
I think when you maybe saying that and then without explanation, people might be like, oh, hang on, how's that work? But now you've given the reason behind it. I totally get that. You know, you've got to prioritize yourself and your relationship if they're growing up in an environment that you want to be supportive and healthy. Otherwise, it is going to have a detrimental impact on them and their well-being and their what they learn. You know, you absorb so much at that young age. You want to kind of have a healthy environment, and so that they know that that's what relationships can look like and be when they're older. Because you carry, not to make this a therapy session, but you carry a lot with you from a young age, don't you, when you're a child? So that makes complete sense to me. But I also don't have children. Disclaimer. So it's not for me. I feel kind of. I don't know. It must be really difficult. You know, sometimes when I think things are stressful and hard, I think, oh gosh, how do people do everything I'm doing and they've got children?
Yes, and it is very difficult. Yeah. And one thing that you can't avoid when you have children is that your sex life is just going to be destroyed for a while.
Yeah. Well, so actually, so that isn't a myth. That's true.
Yes, it is true. And again, because of the myth, people have the pressure. Yeah. As soon as they have a baby, they have the pressure to just slim again and to be sexy again and to have sex again and to live their best lives. It's just not going to happen because the child is going to take so much. You're probably not going to feel any sexual desire. You're probably not going to feel sexy for quite a long time. So my recommendation is, before you decide to have a child, make sure that your sex life is really strong and really good, because if it's already kind of a bit problematic, after children it's going to be worse. so I think it's something to really normalize, you know, for the partners not to put pressure on themselves to have great sex. I mean, the best they can do maybe is a little bit of sex toy and masturbation and vibrator, you know, for 5 minutes before they fall asleep late at night. You know, that might be just as much as they can do. Great. If you can get that orgasm, fabulous. But most of the time people are too knackered for it. Yeah. And it's okay, you know. And so, but again, definitely focusing on the partner, focusing on the warmth and the care and the love of your partner, and the children will be fine inside that relational space. Yeah,
absolutely. Do you, so I think we, as a society, we're not fantastic at talking about these things so openly. You're great, obviously. But I think, I mean, some groups of friends will obviously talk about things like this. Some won't, and some people will feel more comfortable talking about it than others. But there'll be people tuning in who might be thinking, oh, I'd actually really like to talk to somebody about something that maybe is going on in their relationship, or something to do with them and their body and their relationship with themselves. is this something, so, you know, is this something that you would say encourage people to do? Do you think that we need to talk more? Because I feel like that's my opinion, but it's not necessarily true. I feel like you're better placed. Do you think we would be a happier, healthier society if we were discuss these things with our friends, with our, I was going to say colleagues? We're talking about dental teams here, which might seem a bit inappropriate in a workspace, but you know, people have they're friends of their colleagues outside of the professional sphere. I'm not suggesting you start having a conversation about sex whilst treating a patient, but you know, is this something you feel needs to happen more?
Yes, I think so, because you know it's a topic that most people care about, and yet we don't talk about it. Actually, I have a dentist story. Do you want to hear it?
Yes, absolutely.
One day, the dentist recommended that I wore a mouth guard.
Okay.
And I said, yes, sure. So did the thing. And then I tried it, and I realized that it was the most unsexy thing ever. And when I went back to the dentist said, oh, are you wearing the mask? I said, no. And he said, oh, why not? I said, because it makes me feel really unsexy, and I'm prioritizing my sex life over the mask guard.
Yeah.
And the dentist froze. Just did not know what to say. And then I thought, oh, I'm sorry. I'm a sex therapist. Maybe it was inappropriate.
I'm very comfortable talking about this. I apologise in advance.
Yeah. Just to let you know, I understand your
funny.
recommendation, and I'm just not going to take it. I'm just going to prioritize sex life on this one. Yeah, it was so funny that the dentist just could not have the conversation.
Well, it's funny because we had a guest on earlier this year. Actually, you know her, Naomi Sutton, who's a GP, but sort of specialises in sexual health. So quite similar to you, she's was unfazed by any type of conversation surrounding sex and body. Nothing was off the table. She was just discussing it. And I think it is funny because you're all in healthcare, and there will be some parts of healthcare where they rarely need to or feel it's their job to discuss these things, but it will feel quite shocking to come across, even though, you know, it's all relevant. Like Naomi was explaining how dentists and dental professionals can spot signs of STIs and how they can manifest in the mouth and what to look out for. And I just think it's just not a conversation that is had at dental school, really.
Yes, or anywhere else.
Not or anywhere else. So it's whilst it can be, it's quite funny to hear that they froze. Also, I'm like, well, actually, I'm not surprised, because it's just not a conversation that is had often, both in, you know, like we're having now, but also within a professional sphere. And it should be.
Yes, exactly. You know, sometimes when I go to a birthday party and there's a big crowd and so on, someone might just follow me in the toilet just to ask me a sex question, because I've really struggled. And I'm like, oh wow, we have to just have that conversation in secret, where it could just be more kind of like, let's just talk about it. Let's just be open. It's something that most people do. You know, most people have relationships. Most people has sex. Why don't we just talk about it more openly? So I'm really an advocate for opening up those conversations and not be afraid to have those conversations, because then it breaks down the myth that we've talked about, but also it just stops us comparing ourselves with what we think of another person, because what we see of someone else's life, say for example someone who's had a baby, then we go on Facebook or Instagram and we see our friends or neighbors with the best photo of their baby looking fabulous and calm and relaxed and beautiful. I'm thinking, oh well, I look like shit and tired. How do they do? You know, how come I'm so bad? And then you compare yourself to a curated image, and then you just feel bad about yourself, and you judge yourself and you criticize yourself. And that is because we don't talk about anything that's to do with what goes on behind closed doors. And if you go behind people's closed doors, and I'm privileged to do that with my work, then you start to think that, you know, people's Facebook pictures is just not at all what goes on in reality.
No.
And so we have to stop comparing ourselves to each other and instead have honest conversations.
Absolutely. I think the social media point there is really important, because I think it's a fantastic tool on the one hand to open up these channels of conversation. You know, your Instagram's fantastic, for example. You know, you're sort of you're educating people, and you're saying this is something we need to talk about. This is, you know, it's just fantastic. And the same in the dental sphere, you know, you can educate people about oral health and things like that through social media. But then you've got that other side to it where it's a curated image, as you said, and it is you're cherry picking the highlights of your life to display, and it can make you, even though we know that, it still can be very disheartening and difficult to accept that isn't actually the reality. Even if you know that, it's hard to make yourself understand that. I mean, there'll be people whose relationships look different for everybody, and that comparative element. What would you say to people who look at maybe a relationship and think, oh, mine isn't like that, mine's quite different, for whatever reason that might be? What would you say to those people who are sort of a bit unsettled by that?
I'll say, good. Your relationship's not supposed to be like another person's relationship.
Yeah, that's true.
And rather than just looking at someone else's relationship, just look at yours and look at the things that you love about your relationship, the things that brings joy and contentment, and what are the things that you want to change or improve. Because in all relationships, we can improve some things. You know, when especially if we're in a long-term relationship, we age, we change ideas. Sometimes we even change worldviews. Sometimes our favorite dessert in our 20s is different from the ones in our 40s. And so we have to keep in touch with ourselves, and we have to keep in touch in our partners to also make sure that we adapt the relationship based on how they change. And then you keep going in that way, and it's just very fluid. It's not like, oh, I've got this relationship and now it's set and it's going to be it forever. You know, you have to adapt with all the changes that happen, and that also requires conversations. And some of it, as we were talking about earlier, also includes a review. You know, we don't do reviews of relationship, but I think we should do reviews on relationship, because we do change. And sometimes it could be that, oh, actually, maybe we're not suited to each other anymore. And to also normalize the fact that sometimes relationships are forever and other times it's not. And, you know, going back to what we said earlier about, you know, a strong relationship that needs to be strong for children, also it needs to, we need to normalize divorce when there are children in the relationship, because sometimes divorcing, you know, people say, oh, divorce is bad for children, but actually it's worse for children to stay in a relationship where the two parents just hate each other and argue with each other all the time. So it's important that we normalize also endings relationship.
I think that's so important.
Yes, because people don't know how to end relationships either. So often they will end relationships in bad terms, with bad feelings, and take their resentment away with them. And actually there's a way that you can end a relationship in a positive way, where you learn some things, when you clear out of the resentment, and you can move on, you know, from a place of knowledge, self-knowledge, and what you want for the future, but also taking all the stuff that you've learned, all the good stuff that you have learned from that relationship. And that also sex and relationship therapy is good for.
I think, isn't it strange how when a relationship ends and they go their separate ways, that we're surprised when there's, oh no, we're still friends, or no, we get on really well, or if there's children involved, oh no, it's okay, we all still go to the zoo together, that's what, exactly. But your first instinct is, what?
I know.
You know, so many people are like, what?
Yes.
You still go and do things with your ex-husband or ex-wife or whatever it may be, and people are really surprised by that. And I will count myself in that. You know, maybe it's because often they're the ones that are rare. They feel, for whatever reason, that they aren't as common as perhaps relationships that end and then they never spend any time together again. But it is odd that a positive kind of amicable ending to a relationship is something that we find odd.
Yes, exactly. And that goes back to the myth of monogamy and the myth of love as well. You know, love is another myth in terms of, you know, multiple meanings for that word. But a lot of the time we are socialized to believe that because of monogamy, love should be just with one person, and love should be the intimate romantic love. Okay. But actually, we have multiple loves, and we can love. You know, love is just, we never run out of love, right? And we, as human beings, we can love our friends, like really deeply love our friends. We can love our ex-partners, but obviously different from the love that we have for our current romantic partners. And we can love our family-in-law. We can love them sometimes. And so there's lots of love. We love our pets. They're really important. So we have lots of different loves. And I think it's important that we break those myths. And you say there is nothing wrong, and actually it's super helpful to still love your ex-partner in an ex-partner kind of way, right? And why not? Because then that means that person can still be part of the social network. They can still help with children. They can still be some help sometimes that we might need. Think, my ex-partner is good at tech and I don't know how to work my phone. I'm gonna call him or her instead. So why not?
Yeah, absolutely. What are some practical tips that people can take away with them now? So they've identified that maybe their relationship, they've been neglecting it a little bit, for example. What are some, or there might be people actually that said who aren't, and they do have a really healthy, thriving relationship. But what are some things that people can do after listening to this episode to inject some passion back in, or reconnect with their partner again?
Okay, number one, laugh with each other.
Okay.
Because sometimes we just forget to laugh. It's strange, isn't it? But we are, going back to what we were saying earlier about being so stressed in our work and, all the obligations of life. Then we just can spend a whole day not laughing, not even looking at each other. And that can be, making a relationship very flat.
For sure.
So, take an opportunity to laugh. It doesn't have to be, finding the best joke in the world, but it could be like send a meme, a funny meme sometimes is enough, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But something that's humorous, not to take ourselves so seriously, is just so super important, I think. And then, as I was saying earlier, the small little bits are important. A wink, at breakfast time is enough sometimes. Or just a touch that says, I love you. Or a lingering kiss, not just a peck just because you're busy, you're rushing out the door, but, a lingering kiss. Those are small little things that takes less than 1 minute and they make such a big difference. So if you want to think, maybe I've let my relationship go a little bit, just do that, and show up for your relationship. When you get home, usually we wear, the nice clothes for work, and we wear the nice clothes for our friends' birthday parties, and then we go home and we put our pajamas on, and we...
Oh, so true. It's so easy to do.
It
is.
Yes.
It's so easy to do, and that comfort that you get from being in maybe a long-term relationship is so nice, and it's so... it warms you up and you just feel safe, and that's so lovely to have. But I do get what you're saying.
There's nothing wrong with being cozy with your partner, especially in the long winters in the UK.
Absolutely.
Okay, fine, but have a balance. Also, sometimes wear your best clothes at home.
Totally.
And with dinner, and say, hey, you look sexy in your shirt today.
That is such a good point. And it's all these things you just said, they are easy. They don't take time.
So easy.
They don't. I could talk to you all day. This is so interesting. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation as much as I have.
It was great.
It's so good. Seriously, we should go out for a drink or a coffee or something. And this is just such an enjoyable conversation. What a great job you must have.
I love it. I love my job. It's great.
I think it's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.